thing we need to do is talk about the midterm exam and the final exam when they're going to be. I know those of you who are at UCD are aware of the situation, but a lot of you guys are students from elsewhere in the exchange program. So for you guys, I have to tell you, I would love to tell you when the final exam is, but it is decided like 5 pay grades above mine. People I've never seen, like if I'm in a meeting with them, I'm in big trouble sort of people. So it's well above our ability to influence when the final exam is. I'm going to find out the same way as you from their announcement probably mid-October-ish. They're going to announce when all the exams are. And outside of your control, outside of my control, outside of my boss's control, outside of my boss's boss's control. Like it's distant. But midterm we have some say over. We don't have complete flexibility because rooms are an issue, but we have some say. And so I would like to have the midterm either in week 6 or the beginning of week 7. I'm gone in the second half of week 7, so that's not possible. So week 6 starts Monday, October 13th, Tuesday the 14th, Wednesday the 15th, Thursday the 16th, Friday the 17th, the way numbers work, right? And then the next week, either Monday the 20th or the 21st. And so the question I have for you guys is, do you guys have major things due on any of those dates? Do you have major projects due? Do you have exams already scheduled in those dates? And I will try to avoid that. Okay? Everyone got the assignment? Yeah. Okay. So, Monday the 13th of October. Are things going down for the commerce students? Not that, fair enough. 14th, Tuesday the 14th. The future is wide open. Okay. Wednesday the 15th. Thursday the 16th. Yeah?
Yeah, we have an accounting final.
Accounting final. How many of you are in accounting? Oh, at least 40%. We will try to abide. Oh, wait, Thursday the 16th. What about Friday the 17th? Wait, I'm waiting.
Yeah, we have a writing final.
On the 17th?
Yeah.
Great. How many people are in the writing class, whatever class that is? Yeah, okay. I understand. It's not that I don't care, I do care, but yeah. Okay. Monday the 20th. Tuesday the 21st. Other things later on the week. In that week. People with nothing, major things later in the week? Yeah, here. Okay. Looking at this, I am going to depend on rooms, but either doing it the 13th or the 14th or the 20th or the 21st, depending on what we can get. It seems to be the least disruptive to your lives. That's what I'm going to go for. I will tell you what I can get. Okay. That was fun. Good times, good times. So now we're going to talk about economics, macroeconomics in particular. And the first part of the course is on measuring the economy. And there's millions of measurements about the economy out there. There didn't used to be, by the way. Back in the day, there was no measurements of the economy going on, which was genuinely problematic. It was problematic in this way. Suppose, for example, that I'm a really good guy and I just want things the best for the country that I possibly can, and obviously I'm wonderful and great, and so they make me Taoiseach, Prime Minister. It's clearly, Ivan is wonderful, we should make him the guy. So I am genuinely a good guy, I genuinely want the best for the country, and I'm in the olden days, 1900s, early 20th century, up to like 1940-ish. And then, what do? Are we doing well? Are we not doing well? I put in some policies. Are they working? Aren't they working? Well, how do I tell? Well, the same way that you guys know whether the economy is doing well or not. You kind of look around and you know some people, right? And you know, if your neighbor is unemployed, you say, well, maybe things aren't doing so great. And if your neighbor is doing great, you say, well, maybe things are doing okay, right? Which is fine as far as it goes, but I'm tea shop. Everybody I know is doing well. Why? Because they're connected to the tea shop. Things are great for them. So even if I have the very best of intentions, as a big shot, well-connected guy, everyone I know is going to be these big shot, well-connected guys, and they're going to be doing fine, regardless how the economy is doing at all, right? And so one of the things that has come about because we started measuring the economy, you're going to see all of the measurements are going to be very, very, very imperfect. Like, if you look at the news, if you look at the financial news and the economic news, they're going to talk about them like they're wonderful. And they are, but they don't measure what people seem to think they measure. And so one of the things I want you guys to get out of this is that yes, these numbers mean something, yes, they're useful, but they don't mean as much as they purport to mean. Right? And your common sense actually matters as much or even more than the numbers. So to take them with a grain of salt, say they're serious, they're useful things, but they're not the end of all be all. But back in the day we had nothing, which was clearly worse, because all those guys were doing well, so they had no way to know, right? Other than anecdotes. So what would we want, like in a measurement? If we were going to measure the economy, we only had one measurement. What we would really like to know is how nice is it to live in this country? And then we would have this measurement that would say, it is 7.3 nice to live in Ireland this year. And then next year it's 7.5 nice to live in Ireland. We say, the niceness has gone up. Right? Now, if we haven't beaten the common sense out of you yet, which we're going to work on, but if we haven't beaten it out of you yet, you know that's rubbish. Right? Because whether it's nice to live someplace, mostly, in my experience, comes down to whether the girl smiled at you or not. And if she did, it's a glorious place, and if she didn't, it's rubbish. And it doesn't matter the rest of the stuff, right? So the niceness of Ireland is really, for us heterosexual boys, is mostly how smiley are the girls. And other people have other smiles that they're looking for, but you know, the economy is kind of secondary in many ways. As long as you're not dying, you know, and it's providing basic services, that's secondary to friends. Like, this is real. But clearly we're never going to measure that, right? And so some of the most important things, human connections and love and all of that stuff, which is really, really, really important. And different societies encourage that more or less than others. This is also true. None of that is going to be measurable, right? Not in a general sort of way. So all of a sudden, right off the bat, we are going to have to limit ourselves dramatically. But you will see on the news, if you sort of watch economic statistics and you're watching Forbes or Wall Street Journal or any of these places, it is going to feel like the economic statistics are the end-all be-all. But they are not. They are just imperfect measures of something that we kind of want to know, but it's not really central. It's going to be a measure of stuff. Our sort of core measurement is going to be a measurement of the amount of stuff we produce. I'm going to say stuff a lot because I'm lazy, but we really mean everything, goods and services that get produced by the economy. So if you go and get a haircut, that's lovely that there's a professional cutting your hair and you don't have to cut your own hair like my college roommate. And there was a barber call it that would cut it for free. Anyway, he cut his own hair. Issues were had. But clearly, a professional doing that is a nice thing, and we would like to keep track of that. So if I was being precise and I was good and jargon oriented, I would always say goods and services, goods and services, goods and services, goods and services. And in fact, in modern economies, services are a good 2/3 of everything that gets produced. But I'm just going to say stuff because I'm lazy and it's easy. But we really mean goods and services. Services extremely important. So we are going to try to have a measure of how many goods and services stuff gets produced in the economy. Okay? It's not the end-all be-all, but it does tell you something. Like if you are the tea shop and you're a good guy and all your friends are doing well, and you see last year we produced 100 and this year we're producing 90, like the amount of goods and services Ireland is producing went down by 10%, might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. We'll discuss that later. But it is certainly something that happened and you should look into it, right? And so that is going to be very, very useful for policymakers and business people and all this. It gives you some kind of measurements of what's going on in the world that maybe you don't know those people, right? You don't even have to think about tea shops and whatnot. You can think about, you're just managing a major business, right? You're managing, say, Hewlett-Packard, right? And you have to decide how well things are going in Europe to decide how many computer chips to make and how many computers to make. You need to know that, right? And you can kind of go around and kind of look at people and chat with your friends and try to figure it out. But these numbers are going to be very useful in addition to that. Again, one of the things we're trying to get out of this is so that you realize, yeah, you should also be talking to people. Right? The numbers alone are not going to solve your problem, but they are certainly a very useful input to your problem. Okay. So that's what we're getting at. So our first and most basic measurement, the one we're going to focus on in this class, is called gross domestic product. GDP. And you've probably heard of it. It's kind of a celebrity, so people have seen it on TV and such. But as all celebrities, they look bigger from a distance than when you get up close. Tom Cruise very short. GDP as well. So this is going to be a measure of all the stuff that's produced in the economy, goods and services produced in the economy during a year. Okay. It is going to be very, very, very imperfect. And you need to be aware of its imperfections and aware what it does measure and what it doesn't measure. Now there's hundreds of economic statistics that we could talk about, and we could easily not only spend the entire course doing it, we could spend your entire time at UCD doing it and have barely touched the surface. There's loads of them, there's a lot of details involved in them. I'm not going to do that because, I get bored. Also, we want to make room for other things. But we do want you to have a healthy respect and a healthy disrespect for these numbers when you see them. And GDP we're going to use a lot. We're going to talk a lot about GDP even when we get to the theory bit. And so it's useful to know how that works. Now one difference from this semester compared to last semester, well not like all the previous years up to now, is I'm going to spend way less time on this stuff this year than I have in the past. I feel like I'm a theorist. I have something to say about theory that maybe is useful. Anyway, I like it, so that's what I'm going to, don't stop me, so I'm going to do what I like. I'm going to focus more on theory, and so to make time for that, we're going to cut this stuff shorter. But even in the best case, it's always the tip of the iceberg, right? These things are lots of details that people worry about and all that, but we want to get a broad brush idea of what gross domestic product is. So, I start out and I decide I would like to measure the stuff produced in Ireland this year. And suppose I have all kinds of statistics and I can go to tax records and stuff. So let's not worry about the mechanics of measuring it yet, but just what numbers would I want? And they have to be things that are numbers, like how bright when the girls smile. I don't know, that's not really numerically useful and it's hard to measure. So we're going to go with actual numbers. What I want to do is say how much stuff was produced. Right? And I want to say this year 7 stuff was produced. Next year, 7.5 stuff was produced, so more stuff was produced next year than this year. I want to be able to say that. Okay? So what do? Is I count up all the stuff. And we say 10 cars were produced, and 5 sticks of chewing gum were produced. So 15 things were produced this year. 10 cars, 5 sticks of chewing gum. Right? 15 things. Well, clearly, we're not comparing like with like. A car is different than chewing gum. We're just adding them together. You can't add apples and oranges, much less cars and chewing gum. So clearly something has gone wrong. And you could say, clearly cars are more important than chewing gum. Producing a car is a bigger deal than producing a chewing gum. Right? You could say that, but you would have to deal with the actual fact of the matter is cars are evil or chewing gum is good. Like, cars are evil because then you get in a car and then you're separated from your fellow human beings and you get on the road and you're on the M50 and you get madder and madder and madder and you get home and you have to beat your kids to take it all out of you. And it's not good, leave alone the pollution. But chewing gum sticks people together. Sticks them to the ground as well. But you get a stick of chewing gum and you really like the flavor, and this is a great grape, and so you go to the chewing gum club and you talk with the other people and you say, have you tried the new grape? And then you have friends, and you're together and you're a society, and you go to, it's lovely, right? Now, you may agree with me or not, right? And I'm assuming most of you don't, but it's still true, just the same, although I don't actually like chewing gum. But the point is that we got value judgments going on here, right? When we just say, when you sort of naturally say cars are more important than chewing gum, you've made a value judgment on it. It's a natural one, that's why I took such an extreme example, but it's still a value judgment. And it is not unreasonable to say cars are evil, right? There's good sides, but like on balance, maybe they're evil. Maybe it's a bad thing that we made them, right? Different people are going to have different opinions. So if we want to say we're going to make this measurement, and we say let's get somebody really clever and put him in the statistics office, and he's really hardworking and he's really honest, and he's going to come up with this statistic, we actually don't want his value judgments in there. And even if he has good value judgments, because at some point he's going to die or be assassinated by the car lobby, and we're going to have to get a new statistics guy in there, and he's going to have different value judgments. Right? And then we can't compare the before and after because we've got different value judgments going in there. So somehow we have to say which things are important and which things are less important. We have to do that because it is ridiculous to add chewing gum and cars together. Right? We can't add the apples and oranges. We have to say, are apples more important? Are oranges more important? Are they equally important? What the hell? We have to do that to make any kind of number. And so we would like to have a way to do that doesn't depend on anyone's value judgment. That we can get an honest, hardworking, decent guy and his crowd to go into the statistics office, and when he's assassinated, the next guy, as long as he's honest, hardworking, he's going to be coming up with the exact same numbers. We want a system that doesn't depend on the values of the person doing it. Now, one has to say that that might not be the only kind of statistics you want. You might very well want statistics that do depend on the value judgment of the person. Right? In particular, say you're an environmentalist, and you say we produce these things, and they have negative consequences as well. Like the cars are polluting and whatnot, and I would like to take that into account. I would like this statistic to reflect my value judgment. Okay? That's completely reasonable, and whatever you come up with will be useful to people who share your values, and will be less useful to people who don't. So we have lots of NGOs that come up with their own statistics that incorporate various things. Environmental groups come up with environmentally weighted GDP, just like things that if you're damaging the environment, we want to take off from that. Okay? And to the extent that you agree with the value judgments they put in, that's useful. But our core one is going to be value judgment free. And this is great. It's a blessing. It's also a curse, right? Because it doesn't reflect our values. And we're going to see no one's going to agree with the values that are implicit in that. But it is what it is. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to say what is important and what is not important. Right? We have to say that. We have to say how much more important are cars than chewing gum. Right? See, I've already given up the fight. Nobody's coming to my chewing gum club. I don't know why. It's a lovely club, lovely club. It's not always great. Sometimes there's that. I'm just saying. Good club. So we need to do that. And so what we're going to do, and this is great and it's also horrible, is we're going to say the importance of the thing is how much it sells for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the amount of chewing gum produced multiplied by its importance, how much it sold for, plus the amount of cars produced times their importance, how much they sold for. And that's going to be how much stuff got produced. And it's going to be measured in euros now, right? Because we were trying to count up stuff, 7 stuff, but all of a sudden we're talking euros worth of stuff because we're using euros as our measure of how important that thing is in the economy. Okay. People with me? Okay. So that's sort of the background of what we're doing. And this is value free. It's not value free, but it's value neutral in the sense that any old guy can be put in the statistics office. He can be a communist, he can be a right-wing nutcase. It doesn't matter as long as he's honest and he goes through the thing, he's going to come up with the same number. Right? Because we find the price from the market, we find the And then we can compare it across regimes, and who's in charge of the statistics office in this sense is not important. Does have to be honest, does have to be hardworking, does have to be like bright, keep doing up to date on the research and all that. Like it can't be just anyone, but someone decent. We're not basing it on his particular values, okay, other than the values of hard work and dedication, obviously. So, gross domestic product. What is it? Gross, because it's disgusting, but also it's everything, right? So it's the everything, but also the disgusting nature of gross that we're using. We're going to help all of the domestic, meaning stuff produced here. Okay? We're not going to worry about who produces it. We're going to be concerned about where it got produced. Everything is produced here. It's an American company, we don't care. Irish company, we don't care. Whoever produces it, not a problem. They produced it here. That's what we're going to be looking at. And product is the stuff produced. That's the idea. So it is going to be the market value of final goods and services produced or partially produced in a country during a given period. Tattoo it on your forehead or something. Okay. I won't make you regurgitate the definition, but the definition is useful in understanding. Right? So the market value, it seems like we care about the market value, but that's a side issue. Right? The issue is that we had to add the cars and the chewing gum. And so we had to say what was important. And so the market value is giving us how important this good is. So when you go, you say, well, it'll feel like, how much do people spend on stuff? Right? But that's what it is, the stuff you bought times the price of the stuff, how much you spent on stuff. And it is that, but that's not why price is there. Price is there is to say which things are important, which things are less important. So we add up all the stuff that got produced, we see what it sold for, and that's going to be our number. So it's going to be 500 billion euros worth of stuff was produced in this country. So they're going to be produced in the country, so we're not looking at what you bought. We're looking at, our intention is not to measure what you bought. We're sometimes look at what you bought to get there. But our intention is to see how much got produced in Ireland that year. And we include partially produced stuff, because some things takes a while to produce. Some things, grammar great. Some things take a while to produce. So maybe you're building a factory, and for 5 years you're just going to be building the factory. Nothing that anyone wants to use has been produced, but some effort has gone into that. And so we're going to count that. This is arbitrary. Like, we could count it or not, right? We could think, let's say one, right? We're going to grow the grapes, we're going to stomp on the grapes, and then we're going to let them sit around for a few years in a barrel. Right? So the vast majority of the work happens this year, and then 2 years later we get to get drunk. This is the plan. We're a long-term plan to get drunk. It's going to work. You got to plan ahead for these things. You can't be doing it on the spur of the moment. Everyone knows this. So it is a decision of ours to say, what year do we want that effort to show up in? Right? If we put in a lot of effort this year, we don't get to get drunk until 2 years from now. We could, and it would be totally reasonable to say, you stomped on a bunch of grapes, you put them in barrels, it was a lot of work, your feet are dirty, I don't know if you're ever going to get them clean, it's sad for you, but, nothing good happened, it was all bad. Why are we including this in our measure? Right? What we want to know is how drunk can we get? And so we can't get drunk at all now. And so we should count this value 2 years from now, because that's when we can get drunk. And if our measure is to say how nice is it to live in Ireland, it was horrible this year, but it's going to be glorious 2 years from now. Right? And so maybe we should count it 2 years from now. Okay? That would be legitimate and great and a lovely statistic. No problem with it. It's not what we're doing. Okay? And this comes down to how this is going to be used. Okay? We can measure whatever we want, given that the numbers exist. But this is going to largely be used to saying, as sort of a measure of how much work are we doing here in Ireland. It's not going to be our ideal of how nice is it to live here. It's going to be how much work are we doing this year. Are people basically employed? Are they unemployed? There's unemployment statistics as well, but are we producing more stuff or less stuff than before? Okay. It's not going to tell us who gets the stuff. It's not going to tell us where the stuff goes. All of that stuff. It's just going to be a measure of how hard we're working in some sense. And yeah, so we're gonna count the stuff that was partially produced because that's part of how hard we're working. So we stomped on these grapes. Most of that work happened then. All we got to do is get the cork out 2 years from now, and we're good. Maybe a bottle. So a little bit of work 2 years from now, but the lion's share of the work happened now. We're going to count it now. Okay. Arbitrary decision. This is what gross domestic product is. It is about work done. It is not about the niceness of being here. Okay. In fact, like if you think about it, work done is a pain in the butt. Have you ever worked? It's horrible. Horrible. Oh, no. Economics lectures are kind of fun. But well, for the giver, not so much the receiver. But other work is horrible, right? And so we're kind of measuring a bad thing in a way, right? The higher GDP, the more work we put in. So in an idea, I have slides for this. So we'll continue. Right. Yeah. So one side effect of this, which is going to be important, and we're going to think about it a little bit, is that we're using price to say how important things are, right? So things are only important if they have a price, right? Because if it's not sold in the market, it must be unimportant. So if a mother takes care of her child, and I can tell you they're a lot of work, nothing. No value to that at all because it's not sold in the market, so it must not have value. On the other hand, if the mother takes her kid to a creche and pays cash for it, arguably, depends on your point of view, but some people say that's worse care. But it shows up in GDP as it's sold in the market. And so a lot of things happen like as society changes. And you go back, 40 years now, you go back to the 80s in Ireland, so your grandparents. Like way back when now, like when I got here, it was like your parents. But no, it's way back when now. Like women basically weren't allowed to work. Like UCD, if you were a woman at UCD, you were required to quit if you got married. Like it was a thing. And so women were largely working at home. And it was a lot of work because they didn't have like machines to do all the work. Like and taking care of 47 kids or whatever they had. Not easy, not easy. But they were doing that. And then women have gone into the workforce. All of a sudden, all their work is being counted. And they're taking their kids to creche, all of a sudden that's being counted. Now, it's not necessarily true that they're working harder now than they were before. It's probably the other way around. Like, I know when I had a small kid, going to work was a joy. Like everything became so much easier to work. You could sit around, you could drink coffee, you could BS. Anyway, so like maybe like they're working less, but now it's getting counted more. And so part of the economic miracle of growth in Ireland was just a shift from non-market things to market things. Because now it shows up in the statistics. Now see, you need to help you disrespect for these things. Because if they capture something, they don't capture everything. And in particular, they're particularly weak on this, where a lot of things we do, a lot of things that are genuinely important, don't happen on the market. There's no money changing hands, and so they're never going to be counted. And some societies are different in this, right? Some societies, almost everything's done on the market. Well, even that. But lots of things are done on the market. Whereas other societies, the same stuff is happening at home. Right? If you go out and buy cheese, that's going to be counted because there's a price on it. If you make cheese at home, like some of our neighbors in Turkey, I don't like the cheese. But anyway, maybe they like the cheese. Maybe it's for them. Like maybe it's just as good as cheese, and it was a lot of work, but that's not going to be counted. Right? Because it's on the market. So we have a lot of trouble comparing the statistics over long periods of time, particularly when society has changed a lot. And we have trouble comparing them across countries where society is very different. But some things that get counted here would not get counted in Bangladesh. Right? Doesn't mean those things didn't happen, but it means that it's not happening in the market where we can assign a price to it. So if there's no price, its weight is 0. Doesn't get counted. Now, does it stop us? No, it doesn't stop us because we're idiots. We always are going to be saying, oh, we're 5 times as rich as the Bangladeshis. Taking GDP as this thing, or whatever the number is, right? And this is the curse of numbers. one of the things that happens with numbers is you get these numbers and they're out to 8 decimal places. It makes you feel like you have 8 decimal places worth of knowledge, but you don't. And particularly when you're comparing things that are quite different, societies that are quite different, either us versus Bangladesh or us versus our previous selves, right? The comparison is really problematic. But because you have the numbers, you make the comparison, even though it's rubbish. So if anyone's taken things out to 6 decimal places, it is absolutely totally rubbish. That is ridiculous. It is at best a vague idea. But if next year GDP goes down, that does tell us something. The society is broadly similar this year versus last year. So something has happened between last year and this year, and that can be really useful. So really useful tends to be misused. Okay? Because this is what it is not anything else. People will infer a lot of other things about it, but this is all that it is. The market value of goods and services, and the market value thing is really important. Only things on the market get counted, and stuff going to the super rich gets counted more than stuff going to the poor, because poor don't have money, so they don't pay a lot for stuff. But the super rich can buy really expensive things, so those things are implicitly more important, because we use money, like the selling price, as a measure of the importance. Okay, price is measured. There you go. Okay, so we talked about the sandwich. Now we said, if I sell you a sandwich for €5, what we're trying to measure is the sandwich that I produce. We say, well, Ivan produced a sandwich. What is the value of that sandwich? The value is €5. The importance of the sandwich is €5 because I sold it for €5. Now, if you knew the sandwich and you could smell it ahead of time, it's not that good. But you didn't, and I suckered you into it, and you paid €5 for the sandwich. Suck up, suck up. And that's what you did. And so the money changed hands, and we're going to value that sandwich as €5, right? But that's not the only way we can think about that transaction. We can also think that I had €5 worth of income. Why did I have €5 worth of income? I must have done something nice for you. Otherwise, why are you giving me €5? Right? So we don't even need to know about the sandwich. All we need to know is that you gave me €5, and we can say, I've produced €5 worth of value. Okay? Or at least that's what you thought when you were buying the sandwich. Scam, I know. But, right. So we can either see the sandwich, the thing we're trying to measure that I actually produced, value that at €5, saying that's it's important. Or even if we don't have those numbers, we can just say, how much did people spend? They spent €5, that's €5 worth of value. And it is the same because we are this closed economy, in the sense that any money that you give must be for something that I produced. Right? Or we can say, okay, you spent €5, or I have €5 worth of income. Right? So we can look at my income and say, you must have produced €5 worth of value. Or we can look at your expenditure, and we can say, she must have purchased €5 worth of value. It is because in the economy as a whole, expenditure, production, and income have to be the same that we can do this. So there's 3 ways that we can, in practice, measure these things. And they got names. We got the expenditure method, we got the income method, and we got the, what's the other one? The value-added method. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on these. There's lots of details of these methods that we could go into, but we're going to give you a brief overview of particularly the expenditure one. And we're going to spend time on the expenditure one because that leads into the theory section. And so it's going to be useful to think about it a bit for the theory section. But you should know, because there's 3 ways to think about the sandwich, there's 3 ways, completely independent statistics that we can look at to find out how much got spent on Irish goods and services in a given year. Okay. Production approach. So for the production approach, we just look at each company. We look at the company's internal documents. The tax record people have this. We say, how much did you spend on inputs? So I bought some cheese from somebody, and I turned it into a sandwich. I bought it for €3. I sold the sandwich for €5. I have produced the difference between those. I produced the 2 years worth of value. Right? Someone else produced the cheese, I don't know who, but I added 2 years worth of value to this thing because of my clever marketing, and I painted the box blue, and so people buy a blue box, everyone knows that. That's marketing class, isn't it? No? Could be. That's how my wife reported it to me. I think she would be, she did a commerce theory back in the day. Okay. So we do this from company tax records. A nice thing about this method is that when the guy sells the sandwich, we don't have to know whether that's a final product or a partially done product. Right? Maybe it's going to a packaging company to be wrapped up, and then it's going to go on the supermarket shelves. But at the moment, it's just sitting in a warehouse for 18 months before they wrap it up. Right? And so we don't have to know that. We know they put in this value. Maybe it gets sold this year, maybe it doesn't, but this much value was created this year. And that's very nice, and it comes from the tax records. The expenditure approach, which is where we're going to focus most of our attention, is how much did we buy during the year? How much Irish goods and services did we buy during the year? Which is a bit tricky. And this gets from VA taxes and customs taxes at the border. And the income approach is how much income did we make from producing stuff, and this comes from income tax records. So different sources of records. We can calculate these things in 3 different ways. It should come up to the same exact amount because the sandwich theorem, sandwich, I produce a sandwich. The money you give for me is the same as the money that I got, so all 3 of these ways should come out the same. In practice, of course, they don't because there are mistakes in accounting, and God help us, there's tax fraud. And so, it's all coming from tax records, so if you got any tax fraud going on, but they should come out to the same number. They don't, and the fact that they don't gives us a bit of a measure about how much tax fraud is going on. A bit of an idea. Some countries have a big gap between these things all the time, and some countries have a much smaller gap all the time. And that's one of the pieces of evidence that we use to say, like, how efficient is the tax system? How well is it working? They should come up to the same number. Many countries, they come up pretty close. Some countries, less so. Okay. On the other hand, like it's a measure, but it's not like the countries where they come up different. People didn't know folks were cheating on their taxes. Like it's like in Europe, Italy's always used as this example. I don't know if they've gotten it under control yet or not. Like, if you're Italian, forgive me, but we're gonna poke fun here. No, but they've always had trouble with collecting taxes. Like it's like people take pride in avoiding taxes, and they're pretty good at it. And so the numbers come up different, but it's not really anything people didn't already know. Right? From cheating on their own taxes, they know this is how the system works. But nevertheless, it is a measure. Okay. So we have these 3 independent ways to measure the same thing, and they work as independent ways of measuring it because of the sandwich thing. If I sell you a sandwich, you pay me money for the sandwich, I get money for the sandwich. You got the sandwich, you got the money you spent, you got the money I get, it's all the same. It's not the same for me, it's not the same for you, but for the economy as a whole, it's the same. Okay, so we're going to focus on the expenditure approach because it leads into the theory. We're not going to do it in any great detail, but we'll go through it a bit so that you have an idea what the deal is. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to put people into groups. Take all the people, I'm going to look at how much this group spends, how much that group spends, and we'll add them all together. So in principle, I can do this absolutely any way I want, but because I'm a bit of a jerk, what I'm going to do, I'm going to call GDP, the expenditure. So GDP is either expenditure, it's production, or it's income. And not any income, but income from producing stuff. Like if your grandma gives you money, it doesn't count as income. Income from producing stuff. We're going to call it what? Here in particular, we're thinking about it as the expenditure, but of course all 3 have to be the same in here. So we're going to call it what? GDP. I can divide people into blonde-haired people, call them B. Brown-haired people, call them R because B is already taken, and of course the blondes get it. Black-haired people, again, B is taken, so now we're down to L. And white-haired people, W, and of course the no-haired people, N. And we're gonna call these people, and we're gonna say, how much did these people spend? And we're gonna say Y is equal to the amount that the blonde people spent, plus the amount that the brown-haired people spent, the black-haired people spent, the white-haired people spent, and the no-haired people spend. And we're going to add all these things up. That's going to be our GDP. Easy peasy, no problem. Right. I can do this. This is completely legitimate to do. Other than I probably get called something for general discriminatory behavior. It just feels wrong. But why does it feel wrong? Right. Why does it feel wrong? The reason it feels wrong is because these things really have nothing to do with nothing, right? Like it's just picking on people because of their hair color. Like brown-haired people and blonde-haired people, they don't buy stuff for different reasons. They're kind of, like there's nothing different about them other than their hair color, which is stupid and unimportant, right? And so why am I making this division? I clearly must be some kind of racist. And so maybe Ivan's system isn't great from just general, like being a decent person kind of thing, right? But there's nothing like from a scientific point of view that says this is wrong. But not only is it vaguely racist, but it is also completely useless. And so between the two of those, like, well, it's just not, right? But I can do it, and that's my point here. I can divide people into any sort of groups I want. Now, for this to be useful, it's going to be really helpful if our groups are buying stuff based on different reasons. Because then we can say, why does a brown-haired person buy stuff? Why is that different from the blonde-haired people? And if we can get different motivations going on, then we can say something about what's going to happen when things change in the world. As we can look at people's motivations. So we're going to try to divide it up between motivations, more than by hair color, which you'll never see again, except for now, I think. Not useful. We also have problems, and this is another thing I want to say in general, is that whenever we start doing categories, which is what we're going to do, like this is silly, but we're going to do one that's less silly. But whenever we do categories, there are always going to be edge cases. Like for example, this girl. What's her hair color? I don't know. You're tempting to say black because that was her original hair color, but you don't know that. You don't know that was her original hair color. Who knows what it was? She clearly into coloring her hair, could easily be blonde. You don't know about this girl. She's got a life. You leave her alone. Right? So there's these edge cases where you don't know what category, and then we had brown and blonde, right? Well, that's kind of a continuum. Some people are very clearly brown, some people are very clearly blonde, and a lot of people are somehow vaguely in the middle. Now we got this whole thing. Do we want to get people for the hair color they got or the hair color that they're aspiring to? The painted color or the non-painted? Like, it's a whole nightmare. But this is coming about not because it's a hair color thing. This is coming about because we made these arbitrary categories. And life is a continuum. Life is complicated. There are always going to be in-between cases. And we're going to see in our real categories that we're also going to have in-between cases. Because we are putting them into categories, not because that's any way true, but because it is a useful way to help us think. Right? But we should always be aware that when we do that, we are being arbitrary. The world doesn't sort out so nicely. Right? So we're going to have, for example, government and private firms as two of our groups. Well, what about government-private firm partnership things? Right? They're kind of in between. They're kind of in between firms, they're kind of in between government. What are we going to do about that? Well, it's going to be a problem. Right? And there's going to be hundreds of these problems. And they're all going to have to be solved arbitrarily because we are being arbitrary by making categories. Just like the green hair girl. We made the categories, we didn't leave room for green haired people, and so we got to deal with it. But that's on us, it's not on her. Okay. So, those are not the categories we're going to use, obviously, because not useful. Racist and not useful, so let's not do it. So we're going to divide people into different groups. We're going to talk about households, which are people like you and me going about their life. And we're going to typically think of them in a family unit kind of way, just because that's where a lot of the statistics comes from, and that can be useful. Right? There could be one person in the couple who never shops, and the other one shops for everybody. It's kind of useful to think of them together in that way. We're going to talk about firms, private companies, be another one of our groups. We're going to talk about the government, and we're going to talk about foreigners. Okay. And those are going to be our categories. And the reason we're picking these categories Two reasons. One, the statistics tend to come from different places for these different groups. And so just as an accounting exercise, if you're head of the statistics office, this can be really useful to help think about where I'm getting my statistics for these guys and where I'm getting my statistics for those guys. Right? Obviously, firms put in different tax forms than households do, and so it's a thing. But that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because we are going to tell a story where these different groups are doing things for different reasons. Okay? Our households, we're going to think about mostly what they're doing is they're saying, if I got some money, do I want to go on vacation? Do I not want? Do I want fancy dinners? Do I not want fancy dinners? They're thinking about consumption, buying stuff, right? And we have a visceral feeling for this because this is how we live our life, right? Because we are households ourselves, so we know something about this. Okay? Firms, on the other hand, are thinking different thoughts, right? They're thinking thoughts like, should I build a factory? And if I build a factory, it's going to take me 5 years to build the factory. I'm going to borrow a bunch of money to build the factory. And then 5 years from now, the profits are going to start rolling in from the factory. What do I think business conditions are going to be like 5 years from now? What is the interest that I have to pay on this loan that I took out? They're thinking these sort of long-term thoughts. They're also doing goofball current things too, but we're ignoring that at the moment. Like, where they're thinking in a long-term, like commerce student sort of way. Like, what is the present value of this thing and all that kind of stuff, right? You guys see present value at this stage, right? Yeah. No one can own up to it. I'm a better person than that. Don't make me say I have present value. Okay, so our four components of expenditure are going to be consumption, that's the household, investment, that's firms, government purchases, that's our government, and foreigners, which we're going to call net exports. So net exports is exports minus imports. Okay, so here's our first and most important. There's a million green-haired girls in this thing. Right? There's a million people, million issues that fall between categories. I just want to point out one, which tends to be important. I said we want to talk about firms because firms are thinking in terms of buying a factory, right? So interest rates are important. But if we think about people, like mostly we wander through the aisles and we say, oh my God, look, some of the toothpaste is €6 and some of the toothpaste from the same company is €1. Like, so check out the toothpaste, it's a huge variation on the same shelf, right? Ridiculous. I have an obsession with the toothpaste. You just have to bear with me. But we're doing that. Like we're going shopping. I want to get this in my car. I want to get that. And so mostly we're just saying how much money is in my bank. Can I afford a nice dinner? Or is it beans and rice again? And we're doing that kind of thing, right? Beans and rice can be nice. I'm just saying. But if you had it every day this week, maybe not so much. Okay, so we're mostly thinking that way. So we're going to be thinking about our consumers, our private household. We're going to be thinking of them mostly looking at their income and thinking about what kind of nice things they can afford with that income. Okay, that's how we're going to be thinking about them most of the time. Because that's how most of us live our life day in, day out. But there are occasions where households, people like you and me, think like firms. Right, so if you're thinking about buying a house and you're thinking, should I buy a house or should I rent a house? Right, you got that choice. They got to live somewhere, under a bridge, also problematic. I know some of you want to live under a bridge, but make it nice, make it home. So you're thinking about it, should I buy a house? Well, the first thing you do, you go to the bank and you say, what interest rate do I have to pay on this thing? And you think, okay, I'm going to have this house for 20 years. I wonder what the housing market's going to look like over this 20 years. Like if we're heading up to a crash, maybe I wait. But if house prices are going to go up, maybe I buy now. And this is very much like the firms. Like they're thinking, our computer price is going to go up, I should build a factory to make the chips. And if computer prices are going to go down, I need to not buy the factory, right? Because I'm going to be producing something useless. And you're worried about interest rates in exactly the same way that firms are worried about interest rates. If the interest rate is high, then it's going to have to pay a lot to pay my mortgage. If the interest rate is high, I'm going to have to pay a lot for the loan to build the factory. It's exactly the same sort of calculation. So for housing, for people buying houses, we put that into investment, even though it's these people who are doing it. because this is a green-haired girl, and it seems to fit better in this category than it fits in that category. So we arbitrarily deal with this problem, which, and again, it's not a problem of the humans, this is a problem of us thinking about things in categories when real life is not in categories. So we arbitrarily put housing here. And there's dozens, hundreds of these little exceptions. And if you're in charge of the statistics office, you need to know all of them and you deal with them. There's like a standard way to do it, but all of them are arbitrary. It was absolutely arbitrary to put housing here. For example, we don't put car purchases here. But a lot of the same thought processes work with car purchases too. Right? If you're borrowing money for your car, how long am I going to hold the car? How is it going to be conditioned in 5 years? What's the interest payments that I have to make on this? But all that same calculation is happening, a bit less so, but still happening. Right? So it's a continuum, like blonde to brown hair, continuum, and we're just arbitrarily making a cutoff point and saying car purchases don't count as investment, but housing purchases do. Because real life is continuous and messy, but we have made it simple by sticking it into categories. Okay? That's on us. And we have all these arbitrary ways to deal with that. Okay. All right. And then we have government spending. Do not include transfer payments. This is important. So, we are trying to measure the goods and services produced in Ireland this year. Right? And one of the services that was produced, for example, is guards at Mount Joy Prison. Those guys are having the services of, first of all, not letting the prisoners die, and secondly, not letting them out to attack us. Right? It's a lovely, and thirdly, we like this rehabilitating. But that's the thing. Waiting down the list. I don't know. I know some guards that seem like nice people. Anyway, but that's a service that's being provided. Right? This is a good thing in the same way that a haircut is a good thing. Like, we're not getting stuff from it, but it's a service that's being provided. And it is nice that the murderers don't walk amongst us and get rehabilitated. So that's a service that's being provided, and we want to count it because that is a service, like whether it's being provided by the private sector, like in the U.S., which is a nightmare of a whole other thing, or it's being provided by the government. Either way, it's a service of value, and so we want to count it. Right? And so how do we count it? Well, we say the government had to pay for this service. They had to pay the guy's salary and his pension fund and his hospital bill when he got attacked, and all that stuff they have to pay for the guy. And so that is the value of the service that he provided. Right? We attach the monetary value. Right? Because that's what we decided we're going to use as the weight. Right? So the government purchased a service, and so we're going to include the cost of that service as the expenditure of the government. But the government also does lots of other things where they just give people money. Right? So for example, if you have a kid, they're going to give you child benefit. And you get the child benefit check every month, and that's just a gift. It's a transfer from the government to you, a transfer payment. And it's lovely and it's a great thing and all of that, but it is not a service that you provide. And we're trying to measure the goods and services. We're not trying to measure anyone's budget. The budget is a means to an end. We're trying to measure the goods and services, and no goods and services were produced there. Right? So if the government just gives you money, whether they owe it to you for past efforts or whatever, right? Or like any kind of, like a lot of what the government does is just giving people money for various reasons, that's not going to count. Very important for the government, very important for their budget, very important for society. All of that can be true, but they're not purchasing goods and services. We are trying to measure goods and services produced, so we're not going to count that. So it's useful to keep coming back to what are we trying to measure in the end? The amount of goods and services, and we're using the price to say how important they are. And then foreigners, inscrutable, the inscrutable foreigners. As a foreigner myself, I cannot screw myself, so I don't see how anyone else could either. Maybe a psychiatrist, maybe they can screw. But we're going to have exports minus imports. Yeah, net exports. So here's the question. Why? Why are we having exports minus imports? Now I know that Irish students are shy, they're not going to shout it out, but think for yourself a little bit. Just to say, like, this is a bit weird, is it not? Like, why are we minusing imports? So what we're going to do in the end is we're going to say, how much did people buy? Like a private household, how much did they buy? And we're going to measure that from various sources of statistics. And from just a purely mechanical bit, like trying to measure these things, we have no way to tell whether you're buying a foreign thing or an Irish thing. Okay? We're trying to measure Irish things, stuff produced here. It's the gross domestic product. So we don't care about the stuff that was produced in France. Right? Not our problem, the problem for the French. So, but the consumer himself and the place he went to, nobody knows whether it's produced in France or produced in Ireland. And the fact of the matter is, there is absolutely nothing except perhaps some services that is produced in Ireland entirely. You can go and get Dubliner cheese, which is from the farm down in Temple Bar, and you can go to and buy that, and it's all Irish. I'm guessing, I'll probably be longer now, but you can go buy, pretend it's Irish, right? And you get it, and you say it's from an Irish farm, and it's Irish cows, and it's an Irish factory where they put the chemicals in. I don't know, it gets by Dubliner cheese. Where they make their lovely cheese, which I really do like. I'm perfectly happy to get it shipped. All right, anyway, I feel like a YouTuber. Like and subscribe. So you get the cheese. You get the cheese, and it is, like, you can go see the place. It's not in Temple Bar on the north side. And you can go see the place, and you can meet the cows and all that. It is genuinely an Irish sort of thing, I think. I could be wrong. This is my understanding, right? Pretend yes. Okay, but you're buying the thing, and there's a label on it. There's some wax paper, and there's a label, and there's that green ink. Where did the chemicals in the green ink come from? I don't know. You don't know. Dubliner cheese doesn't know. Nobody knows where the hell that green ink came from. It probably came from all over the world to make the green ink that they stamped that. So even if you're buying 100% Irish as best that you can, some of it's going to be foreign. Because it's all now, all kinds of little bits that go into everything. And honestly, when we're buying, we have no idea how much is Irish, how much is not. You can also buy a completely foreign thing. Right? A completely foreign, genuine French cheese. And you say, aha, this is French cheese. Except it's not entirely French cheese. Right? Because there's some services. There's the guy that shipped it from the airport down to the shop. And there's the refrigeration that happened to keep it cool, and there's the shop sell it sold. So some of that French cheese is Irish. But some of it was produced here. A lot of the effort went in here. And so it's any particular product. There is absolutely no way for me, you, the statistics office, or even the guy who made it, to know how much is foreign and how much is Irish. And every product is a mix. And so when we're looking at consumption, there's going to be no way to know whether it's Irish stuff that people bought or whether it's foreign stuff. It's some of each, right? And in particular, most people, most of the time, are just buying stuff. Like, they're trying to get through the day. Life is hard. They're living under a bridge. Give them a break, for God's sake. And so they're not really caring about that. And so when we get to the theory section, we want to talk about people's motivations. Well, most people's motivations, most of the time, are not where they're buying from. Okay, Canadians aren't buying from the US these days, so that's a motivation. But most of the people, most of the time, not buying based on origin. And even if they were, they can't know the origin. And so when we're talking about consumption, both theoretically and in the numbers, we're not going to be able to tell what was produced here and what was produced abroad. Right? Which is a problem because we just want to measure what's produced here. But it's not in the numbers, it's not going to be in our story, it's just not there. And the same thing is true for everybody else. Right? The government can figure out whether its guards are working in Ireland or working elsewhere. But a lot of things the government buy does. They buy a truck, right? And you don't know how much was produced here, how much was produced elsewhere, and so on. Okay? And so what we're doing is we're counting up things bought by consumers, things bought by firms, by and large, things bought by the government, things bought by foreigners, because they were produced here. We're exports, we produce them. So we're trying to count up what got produced. But then, when we did all of this, some of that stuff in every category was French. What the hell? What are they doing in our numbers? They get everywhere. Anyway, they were French, and we don't want to count them. We don't want to count them. But what we can do is we can go to the go to the port and say, how much French stuff came in? And that must have found its way into all of this stuff. So we just subtract off the French stuff at the end. Just so all of these things, our consumption isn't just Irish stuff, our investment isn't just Irish stuff, government spending isn't just Irish stuff, exports even are not just Irish stuff. But then overall, because we subtracted off the income, and the imports, it becomes, the whole number is just Irish stuff. We don't know how much of those imports went to consumption, investment, government spending, we don't know that. But we do know that in the end, by and large, aside from statistical discrepancies, we have just the Irish stuff produced here. And that's the beauty of this, that it comes from exports and imports, comes from port authorities, right? They track things coming in and out. Any questions about that? Okay. Okay. So here's what it's going to be. It's going to be y is equal to c plus I plus g plus then exports. Sadly, I can say that without looking at the board because I've been at this way too long, way too long. Do not memorize that. You're going to see it all the way through the course. It will be everywhere. It'll be in the theory, it'll be, and we're just dividing brown-haired people, blonde people, etc. We just made these arbitrary things. They are going to be useful to us as statisticians because they come from different books, right? And they're useful to us as theorists because they come from different motivations. Okay, so unlike the hair color thing, these are going to be useful, but they are equally arbitrary. Now, when I had this class, way back in the midst of time, like our teachers started going into all the green-haired girls. And he'd like talk about this borderline case and that borderline, and there's dozens and dozens and dozens. And I got kind of obsessed with that. I was a real jerk. And I kept going, like, what about this case? And what about that case? There's millions of them. And they're all arbitrary. And the thing is to do them consistently. As long as you're consistent, then you can compare this year's numbers with last year's numbers. But if you're not, then you got nothing to compare. But all arbitrary because our categories are arbitrary, and so arbitrary is going to be the name of the game. Okay, now here's the top. Okay, so here is UK GDP by expenditure. I put up UK because Ireland can get a bit weird because we have that weirdness. We have this offshore investment banking, right, where it's tax fraud banking, tax avoidance banking, and that becomes a huge thing in Ireland. So UK is broadly similar to us, and this gives you a better sense of where the economy is. And consumption is the lion's share. Government spending is a good chunk. Our exports is the thing that are weird, right? Because a lot of our exports are financial products of some goofiness. It's not a real thing, but it shows, and it's a mess. Right? It's a mess interpreting it. Investment is a good sized chunk. Investment is also the one that changes the most year on year. Because it's forward-looking by nature, right? Because the company is saying, 5 years from now, will I be able to sell computers and at what price? And what is the interest rate this year? If they get a bee in their bonnet and think that 5 years from now, there won't be good business conditions, for whatever reason, they're going to stop investing, and investment can drop a lot. Or they think it's going to be great 5 years from now, investment can shoot up. Right? And sometimes they're right about these things, and sometimes they're wrong. Any other human. And so, here I am calling firms human. What's wrong with me? Anyway, but they're run by humans, right? Probably. It's hard to know. You guys would know that. So this can fluctuate a lot. But the others are fairly stable. Like in bad years, consumption does fall, but the main volatility tends to be investment. But just to give you an idea about like the sort of magnitude of these things. There is another measure that you will hear a lot about that we are not going to focus on in this class, and that's gross national product, GNP. And here we've been focusing on gross domestic product, everything produced here, right? Which means that if the Americans have a factory here, that counts as ours. Another thing we could do, and GNP does that, is to say, how much do Irish people produce? Now, a lot of Irish people are off in Australia and whatnot, and so we'd just be looking at who is doing this production. Right? And so then we would count all the Irish that are producing stuff elsewhere, But we would subtract off all the stuff that's being done by the American firms here. Right? Because it's who owns the thing that's producing it. And that can be useful for some things. It is not going to be particularly useful for us because we are by and large going to be concerned with how the economy affects ordinary people. And ordinary people are by and large working for a living. And so in a sense, it doesn't matter whether they work for an American firm or they work for a British firm or an Irish firm. It's work for them, right? And if there's some Seamus goes off to the US and becomes a bond trader and makes 100 billion euros, good for Seamus. I'm like, who the hell cares? Right? It's not, it would show up in gross national product, but it doesn't affect lecture. Other than his mom. His mom's very happy. So that's good. Although he never calls. It's really sad. He should call me. Okay. So Ireland has very different gross domestic product versus gross national product, right? Because we have all that foreign foreign investment, direct investment. And so all of that counts in our GDP. It's produced here, but it doesn't count in our gross national product. So our gross national product is way lower than our gross domestic product. Anything made by Americans doesn't count. No, I say Americans, but of course it's all run by Dutch. Anyway, whatever. Indians, Turks, I got all kinds of folks there, but American officially incorporated U.S. Okay. So particularly for Ireland, focusing on gross domestic product, we're caring about how people live their life here is much more important than how Seamus is doing in New York and all that. Okay. A few things so that's how it's done. And that's kind of all there is to it. 1,000 details. Oh my God, 1,000 details. And we also have two other ways of calculating it, right? We have the income method, and we've got the value added method. Okay. Lovely. In previous years, I've talked about the value added method for a while. Not doing that here. I want to move on. Okay. This is what we need in order to move on, but those exist. Income method is all about defining what income is. Gift from your grandmother is not income. If you earned it in some way by producing a good or service, then it's income. It's redefining the word income. Then you add up all the income. Because of the sandwich theorem, you get the same number. But we're going to ignore that and just talk about what is good and bad about this statistic. Right? This thing that we've calculated out. Now, one thing that it doesn't include, and generally speaking, we're happy that it doesn't include, is purchases of old things. So if you go and you buy a house in Dunleary, you pay 100 million euros, you get a one-bedroom house in kind of a sad state. Good for you, that's lovely. The house was built 150 years ago. It doesn't count, right? Because nothing got produced. Again, we're trying to measure what got produced this year. We're not trying to actually measure your purchases. We've been talking about purchases, but it's a means to an end, and the end is how much stuff got produced. So anything purchases of old things are not going to get counted. On the other hand, somebody probably helped you out on that, right? There's probably a realtor involved, taking a 90% cut of the price. And that realtor is presumably providing a service. We're putting the signs up and putting the baked bread in the oven so that it smells nice when you walk in and all that. That's a service he's providing. And so his fee would be counted because it's a service that's provided this year. Okay, so even though it's an old thing, we don't want to count that, but there's a service of matching buyers and sellers, like getting this old good to somebody new. The old good is not a value, but this effort that was put into making the match, that is a value. We want to count that. And the solicitor who robs you on the way and all that all gets counted. But the old stuff itself doesn't. So the house doesn't get counted, but all the people who put in services to make the sale happen, those would count. Things that GDP does not include, but honestly should, if we possibly could make it happen. We would like it to include self-sufficiency. Like, if you took care of your kid, that is a good thing that happened. And it is much better than if you didn't take care of your kid. Right? And so we would like to say, look, people this year are taking care of their kids more than they were last year. That's maybe nice, maybe, but a lot of work for them. So, but we would like to count that, but we don't, right? Because it doesn't take place on the market, and so we don't count it. But we would love to, we just can't. And that's something that varies dramatically between societies, which means that whenever we're comparing across societies, we have real problems. Now, we tend to ignore them. People will do it anyway, but you should be really, really, really suspicious of that. Like if they come and they say, you know, we're 15 times richer than Bangladesh, or we are richer than UK, which is GDP per capita for a while was higher than the UK. People were so proud. So, oh my God, so proud. But you would probably learn more about how people's living standards are if you just sort of walked around Dublin and Limerick and then walked around London and York and just saw how people live. It is as informative as the numbers, right? You should not be thinking these comparisons are super useful. They can give you a start, but it's just a start. And when you start, you know, comparing us to Bangladesh, you're getting into complete rubbish territory. Because society is so different there than it is here. Different things happen on the market there than happen on the market here. A lot more people are self-sufficient. They're making their own cheese. They're still eating cheese, right? And they're still putting the work into it, but it's not showing up in the statistics. Right? Barter, if we just swap some stuff, that's never going to show up in the statistics. And if it's old stuff, we don't care. We don't want it to show up in the statistics. But a lot of times people make stuff and they swap. Right? And again, this is something that varies a lot between society. Right? Us in Germany, well, actually Ireland, like rural Ireland, has a lot of swapping. Right? So that's the thing. But like Germany, less so. They do less direct swapping. And you go to more traditional societies, and loads of things are just done informally. I'll give you this. You know, loan me your mural, and then I'll do this. Right? And none of that's going to show up. Right? Although it should. Okay. Undocumented work, if you're working illegally or under the counter, never going to show up because ideally we measure it, but we can't because it's not measured. Like you're not giving the government the statistics, how they're going to use them. Right? And importantly, illegal activity. Heroin sales should show up in GDP, but they don't. And you say, we shouldn't, like that's bad. But we're not doing value judgments. We're not saying what's better, chewing gum or cars, even though cars are evil. And we're not saying what's better, cancer treatment, drugs, or heroin, even though heroin's evil. We're not doing that, right? We're saying, what is the value of goods and services produced this year? And heroin wasn't produced here, but the sales and distribution and marketing all happening here. And so would you count that, right? And it's a lot of work. I see those guys out on the street near my house. They're working hard. Okay, it's harder work than it needs to be because they're stoned, but still. So we should count it, right? Again, we're not making value judgments. Okay? Now, it is reasonable to make value judgments. Okay? We should say, like, heroin's a bad thing, but it's not what we're doing in GDP statistics. That's an important thing, but it is separate from what we're doing. Okay? We're saying how much, and once we go down that route, by the way, we say, okay, like heroin's obvious, we should leave heroin out. Well, lots of other things are obvious, like cars pollute. We should count that, right? And you know, does some billionaire need another Rolls? And like, isn't that really taking away resources from people who like there's like a lot of value judgments that we could do that are quite reasonable, but then we have a very different number. And people calculate those numbers. It's not like they don't, but that's not what we're doing here, the GDP. Right? So we would like the heroin sales to be in there. Okay? Now, we can't get them in for two reasons. One of the stone guys on my corner, they're not keeping great records. Although they're pretty quick with numbers, you'd be surprised. But mostly because they're never going to tell the government, because otherwise they go to jail and the cars get fucked up. This whole thing. And so we're never going to have those illegal activities in there. People do make estimates, by the way. It's not like it's something that people don't do, but they're not going to be in the official statistics. And you can see all of these things are things that vary a lot across societies. They vary a lot over time. They vary a lot by place, by just general societal, age of people. All kinds of things affect these things. And so it means that comparisons, even though we're going to make them because we can't help ourselves, but comparisons are always going to be super problematic. So then our question is, we have this statistics and we're going to use it all the time. And the first and most important question I want to ask about this is like you're going to see for the rest of your life, every time you open a financial pages or any kind of news article about the economy, you're going to see bad news, GDP is down. Good news, GDP is up. Right? We got more GDP than the British. Yay, aren't we great? And that kind of thing, right? This is going to happen over and over again. But our first and most sort of important, not our first, but our second most important thing to say, take these numbers with a grain of salt, is to say, do we actually want GDP? Do we want GDP up or do we want it down? I would argue we want the lowest GDP possible. And why is that? So consider two economies. We have Ireland, not today's Ireland, but 1840 Ireland, which was a grim place. So I've heard. At the Dysphoria Museum, they were pretty clear. It was a grim place, grim. There was anyway, Ireland had this feature that it had huge exports to the UK and very small imports. Right? They produced a ton of stuff. They produced all kinds of potatoes, by the way. But they didn't get to keep the potatoes. The potatoes fucked off to the UK, and they were gone. And just these huge exports. Right? So they had high GDP. Not as high as they'd like, but they were producing a lot of stuff. But Ivanland, which you can move to if you want, is a nice beach country. And what happens is you sit on the beach, and people bring you foreign-made Mai Tais. And they bring you a foreign TV set with TV shows that the Americans have worked hard to produce. And you watch the TVs and you drink your Mai Tais, and foreigners just bring you stuff. It's glorious. Glorious. And so in Ivanland, we have huge imports. We got no exports because we didn't make anything. So we got nothing to export. But we're just sitting around on the beach. Now, you might not be the person who likes sitting around, but pretend you do. Pretend you do. Clearly, this is a better place to live than slave away and everyone else gets the benefits of this thing. And Ivanland is glorious. The foreigners give us stuff, and we don't have to do any work. Okay? Not even economics lectures. Nothing. It's amazing. Amazing. Okay. Now, Ivanland seems better to me. I don't know. Like, maybe I atrophy and become like an alcoholic and stuff. But good glorious on the way. Anyway, it is nice when foreigners give you stuff. If they work really hard to produce a TV show and they produce a TV, it's lovely if they just say, Ivan, we love you, have a TV, and here's some shows we made. Okay. It's going to be the next Game of Thrones. No, it's not. Anyway, but that's what they're going to say, right? And it is really a pain in the butt to work really, really hard and send it all to somebody else. Right? And so what's left off of the GDP, left off of the statistics, is that this is how much stuff we produced. And yes, stuff is nice. Goods and services are nice. But it was also a giant pain in the butt to produce it. Right? Somebody had to get out of bed and do all this work to make it happen. Right? So there is a cost to producing this stuff. And so that's not in there. Right? So it can't be the case that what we want is the highest GDP possible. Right? Because we can easily do that by enslaving everybody and whipping them and making them work 23 hours a day. We could get more stuff. But that's not a nice place to live. But it does have higher GDP. Right? The more overtime you work, the less you see your family, the higher GDP is. Now, it's good that we produce some stuff and we don't starve and all that's great, but there's a cost that's not in there. Right? That people have to do this thing. And so we don't want GDP to be infinitely high. Now, it is also true, and I've talked to a lot of foreigners, myself included, and none of them seem to be willing to work really hard and send me all this stuff. And so Ivanland might not be as practical as I at first thought, because the foreigners are selfish bastards and they want to get something from the fruits of their labor. So in order to get them to do nice things for me, I feel like we're probably going to have to do nice things for them too. Right? And so that's going to be a bit of work on our part. And so we're going to have some GDP so that there's something nice that we can do for them so that they will send us the TV show that we will ultimately be disappointed in because it's not Game of Thrones. Right? And so there is a trade-off. Eisenland doesn't take into account reality, that people aren't going to give us stuff for free, but it would be nice if they did. And so GDP, in that sense, is a cost that we pay to get the nice things. We're doing that because that's how we get people to do nice things for us, is we produce something in there. That's why people go to work, right? You go to work so they pay you money so you can get the nice things. Right? And so you wouldn't go to work if they weren't paying you money and you weren't getting nice things. No one's going to send you nice things if you don't work, and so you work. It's a cost that you pay in your life, producing that stuff so that you can get the nice things. But it means that more is not necessarily better. It's not that we want GDP to be as high as possible. There's probably some balance, right, between higher GDP means more work, and there's a limit to how hard we want to work as a society. And less GDP means less work, but also less stuff, and so there's a limit to how poor we want to be as a society. And of course, people get some satisfaction about doing work as well as a society. There we go. What else do we have? Okay, other things. It only measures goods transacted on the market, which we talked about. It does not include externalities. Externality means when I use a good or a service, that can also affect other people. Right? So I might pay €5 for this sandwich, and then you're sitting in the hall eating your €5 sandwich, and it stinks up the whole area, and everyone around you is disgusted. You got €5 worth of value, and you damaged their day. That's external to you, the buyer. It was €5 value to you, but it was actually less than that to society because you had that external effect on it. That's a negative externality. You can also have positive externalities. Right? Oh, that sandwich smells delicious. It inspires me to cook tonight. Right? It could be positive as well. But it doesn't include that because it's only the person who paid the money. It's never going to reflect most people's values because lots of people buy stuff that we think that it would be better for society if they didn't. And there's no balance against that. Another way we can get GDP up, and this is glorious. If we really wanted Irish GDP to be higher, what we could do is we could get a bunch of bulldozers and just knock over every building in Dublin. And then that would be horrible for everybody, but they would work really, really, really hard to get themselves, to build new buildings. Right? So GDP would actually go up if we destroyed the existing buildings. This is a fact. And sometimes, like professional economists forget this. There was, when was it? I don't know. In Japan, there was a really big earthquake that destroyed a lot of infrastructure. And people said, this is terrible for the economy. And then they look back on it at the statistics, and they're all surprised. You can't even see it in the statistics. GDP, even though all those factories were destroyed, output didn't go down. Well, yeah, because they had to work really hard to rebuild the bridges and all that, right? Doesn't mean it was a good thing. It just means that when you don't have your infrastructure, you're going to work hard to recreate it. And we're counting all the stuff that you made, so you worked hard, we're going to make more stuff. Right? And so, again, it's not a measure of how good things are, even though GDP was constant, earthquake was horrible. Right? And so it doesn't measure that. It measures how much stuff we produced. And we talked about this. Blah, 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 blah. It's a slide. Okay, so with all these problems, and they really are genuine problems, and you really should be aware of the problems, and you should take all these numbers with a big, big grain of salt. If you start going out to 7 decimal places, which you technically can, it's clearly rubbish out there. It is nonetheless really, really useful. Right? It's not a measure of how nice it is to live in a country. It is not. And yet, it seems not unrelated to how nice it is in a country. So what we've done here is we've taken GDP per person in high-income countries, least developed countries, and sort of average developed countries. And you can see it varies quite a lot. And you say, look, us rich countries, we're like 25 times as rich as them. But of course, we know that's rubbish, right? Because they have very different societies than we do. They still get the cheese, they just made it themselves. But we get the Dublin cheese. Temple bar cows, Trump cows. So we know the numbers themselves, comparing them is kind of rubbish. but they are different for sure, right? And it's picking up something. And that something you should be thinking of as being fairly vague, right? Like honestly, it's fairly vague because the societies are so different, they're not directly comparable in numbers, okay? And this is one of the problems. But nonetheless, those numbers seem to be related to things that we genuinely would care about. Like we don't care about those numbers or shouldn't, but they seem to be not unrelated to things that are important. Like how many years of life do you get? That's maybe important. I don't know, depends on if you like life or not. But many people do, I've heard. And so our life might be good. Might depend on how you look at it. One thing that we know is good is that if your baby dies, you're going to be very, very sad. Can you imagine the horror? And so, much less babies dying in the high GDP countries than in the low GDP countries. And that is definite sadness, right? There's definite sadness going on here in a way that we probably can't comprehend. And so, this has got to be good, right? That's got to be better. I don't know, your moral judgment. Maybe you have a thing against babies. But it seems to me, under 5 mortality rate, this is a kid that you met and went to school, this is horrible. This is absolutely horrible. And high GDP seems to be related, connected to that. And that's important, right? I don't know. I think so. And like everything that we can come up with, right? Anything that we can measure. And we can't measure loads of important things, and that's part of the problem. But anything that we can say, like, this is measure, any kind of measurable thing that we come up with, this is clearly better, on average, not always, in the high GDP countries than the world GDP countries. Even though GDP is not a measure of how nice it is to live there, it is definitely nice not to have your child die, right? And so they seem to be related. Now, it's not universal, right? There are some low GDP countries that have very low infant mortality rates, and there's some high GDP countries that have relatively high infant mortality rates. So it's not like it's a magic to get high GDP and all your problems are solved. But it is not unrelated either. So you can think about it, you have more resources. It still matters what you do with them, but many countries decide, I have resources, let's use those resources to have the babies not die. Not everybody makes those decisions, but, and you probably know which countries are the outliers. Cuba does quite well, US does quite poorly for the money. So that's GDP. So we're going to use it, and I made fun of the newspapers talking about GDP and it's up and it's down, and like it's always a good thing. It's not a good thing either, right? It is messier. It is, take it with a grain of salt, but it means something, but we don't quite know what. I mean, it means what it means, but it seems to be related to a lot of other stuff. So if like GDP goes up next year, it's probably a good thing, all else equal. It probably means people are going back to work and stuff, but our goal can't be, let's get GDP as high as possible, because nobody wants anyone bulldozing Dublin and getting the whips and making us work, because that's what we would do to get it as high as possible. There's some kind of balancing act there. But on the whole, given that we're going to be crude, given that we're going to have numbers that are imperfect, which we are, it is the best we could do under the circumstances, I think, is the way you should think about it. It captures something, but, kind of cross your eyes and lose focus when you look at the numbers. Don't focus on them in too detail, because at detail they get rushed. I told this, by the way, I go back, my aunt is like real left-wing. Like in the hippie days, she was like in one of those militant youth organizations, right? Think. Look at all the guys that made the news. And so I was like telling her how GDP doesn't measure women's work at home. It doesn't measure men's work at home either, but they don't work at home, so it doesn't matter. But it doesn't measure women's work at home. And so she was incensed. Oh, she was so pissed. She was so pissed at the world for creating this statistic that doesn't measure the contribution. Like, that's completely legit. But again, the best we could do under the circumstances. It's not that this is the best that we want. This is not what we want. this is what we could get. And when you get to any of the statistics, and I would like you to generalize from this, any of the statistics, economic or otherwise, business statistics, everything, is always the best you can do under the circumstances. When you get to know them, they all have horrible, horrible flaws. Or even if they don't have flaws yet, as soon as you start to target them, then it changes people's behavior and that weirds them out. Right? So this is a famous thing is in software, like they started being able to count how many bugs different programmers had in their code. Right? And then they started giving them bonuses for fixing bugs to try to encourage them to fix bugs. And so then programmers started putting bugs in so they could fix them easy. So as soon as you start to target things, it changes people's behavior, and so all the statistics in the end become kind of rubbish, and you should cross your eyes, defocus a little when you look at them. Very useful, but not all that they're purported to be. Economic statistics, every one of them can do the same thing. They all measure something, they can be useful, but only if you continue to use your brain. Right? You can't just take them as the goal, you can't just take them as set in stone. You have to be thinking, we're comparing Ireland with Bangladesh, really? Like, how is that going to come up with numbers that we can compare? Why are we comparing these things that we can't compare? What is wrong with us? We have a mental breakdown. Okay, but so there's that. And you should do that with everything. Like, they're all, life is messy and we're trying to reduce it to a number, right? Whatever we're doing a statistic, any kind of number, life is messy, we're reducing it to a number, a lot is going to get lost in that. And here is one that we're going to use a lot. And you can see exactly a lot got lost along the way. Just the best we can do under those circumstances. Okay. How are we doing? Okay, we have a little bit more. So the one problem we have here, so that's what I'm going to say about GDP. We're going to have a lot of stories about understanding where it comes from and what we can do to get it higher, what affects it, and that kind of thing in the theory section. But that's all I'm going to say. So in particular, when you're looking at old exams, on the old exams, I was always covering the value-added approach as well, but we haven't done that here. Right? So you're not responsible for the value-added approach, other than knowing that there's 3 ways to do it, and right, because of the sandwich thing. But the details of how to do it, you're not responsible for in this class. And look, you got enough tape and everything. So here, come back. You can enforce that later on. In case I screw it up. Okay, so one thing that we have at the moment, and one other statistic that we're going to need in order to tell our stories, is that we need to say something about prices. And because what we have is we have the statistics, which is all the goods and services added up, but we had to say which one was important, so we had to say this is how much people paid for it, just to say how important it was. We didn't want to do that, but we had to do that. Right? So what we end up with is the euro value of all the Irish goods and services produced this year. Okay? And so if that goes up, we have no worldly idea whether we're producing more stuff or prices just went up. Right? Because it's price times quantity. If we produce 10% more stuff, GDP would go up by 10%. But if prices got 10% higher, GDP would also go up by 10%. And they're a very different situation. One of us is working harder, and the other one is just everything's more expensive. Right? It's a very different sort of deal. And so we need some way to say what's going on with prices. And any particular year, what you're going to see is that some prices went up, and some prices went down. Right? Or some prices went up a lot, and some prices just went up a little. So we're right back where we started. We have to say which price movements are important and which are less important. Right? And so we're going to do a very similar exercise as we did before. We're going to say we're going to look at this, all the different prices, and we're going to weigh them by some metric. Say this one is relatively important and this one is relatively less important. And the way we're going to do that, what is my first slide? That is what I said. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, which ones are important? Well, if you think about your life, and I came and told you, you know, it is really, really, really sad. The price of private jet aircraft has gone up by 50% this year. And I'm just so bummed about it. It's really like, I feel kind of like, would you care Right? Does that affect your life in any way that the price of private jet aircraft went up by 50%? It doesn't. Why not? Because you're not buying any private jet aircraft. You already have all you need. Only so many private jet aircraft you need, you're good, right? You can't afford one? What a pain. So no, you're not buying any more. Like that craze is over in your life, and you're just sticking with the private jet aircraft you already got. And so it doesn't matter to you that the price went up. But if I said the price of shared apartment dwellings in Dublin has gone up by 50%, well, it has, you'll be horrified, right? Because this is like central to your life. And so the difference between these things is not that one's more important than the other, although it is, but that one of them affects your life and the other one doesn't. And it affects your life because it's something that you actually buy. Right? And so what we want is a measure of how much it affects your life, which is going to be the amount that you buy. So we're going to use the amount that you buy, the you we call them, the amount that people buy as this is how important this price movement is. If a price is going up and no one's buying that thing, nobody cares. Right? If price is going up and it's like a really important part of your budget, that's a big deal. If it's a price that's going up and it's something that you buy but it's not too important, like chewing gum goes up, you don't come to the club meetings. I expect to see you there. But since you don't come to the club meetings, the price of chewing gum, that sucks. But like life goes on, right? It's not going to change your budget in any meaningful way. So that you would care about it, but not very much, because you don't spend very much of your budget on chewing gum. But you spend a ton of your budget on a place to live. So when that price goes up, it really affects you a lot. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to use quantity as how important it is. So we're going to have price times the importance of the price. So it's going to be price times quantity. Price times the importance. Now, when we were doing GDP, we said we were wondering about the quantity. And we said we have to say how important it is, so we used the price. And so we had price times quantity. And so it's kind of going to be the same thing, the price times quantity either way, right? Because the thing we care about has changed, but the weight has changed to be the other thing. But it's always price times quantity in the end, which is a place where people who fell asleep in the second half of the class are going to struggle at some point. Not you guys. You guys are all strong with us. But you know, this is a thing that students kind of miss, because when you start doing problems, it's always price times quantity, price times quantity. Why are you using one versus, it's always the same. And so what makes it GDP versus what makes it a price index is that one of them is telling you what you're interested in, and the other one is saying how important that is. And we switch the roles in the two. GDP, we're using price as how important it is. In price indexes, we're using quantity as how important it is. Because if you're buying a lot of housing prices matter a lot to you. If you're not buying any private jets don't matter to you. Okay, so we're going to have a bazillion price indexes, and almost all of them are constructed in the same way. Okay, so almost all. There's one, which is, like, yeah, I'll come back to it. We won't talk about it much, other than to mention it exists. But the vast majority, 99.99% of price indexes are constructed in the same way. We're going to be concerned about the consumer price index. And so what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what a typical Irish consumer buys. And we're going to go around with a shopping trolley, and they call it a market basket because the Americans are good. We come up with this, what they call baskets. We call them trolleys. So we're going to go around with a trolley, and we're going to say, here's what a typical Irish consumer buys. He buys a toothpaste. He buys 3 bags of rice. He buys some noodles, 47 bags of potatoes, and we're just going to put all that stuff that a typical Irish consumer buys into our trolley. And then we're going to take our trolley around and we're going to see how much it costs to buy that stuff. And then next year, we're going to take the same trolley around. We're going to get the mold off the potatoes. But the same trolley around to see how much it costs to buy that same trolley of goods next year. Okay? Just like the supermarkets sometimes do. Like they get a trolley of goods and they say, we bought this trolley here and it was 112 euros and we bought it at our competitor and it's 140 euros. We are so much cheaper than them. Exactly the same exercise. Of course, they pick their products accordingly, but we try to use what a typical Irish consumer is buying, because it's the consumer price index. We put them all in the trolley, and we price them out each year. And we just see how that price changes over time. Is that price of the trolley full of goods going up? Is the price of the trolley worth the goods going down? And if the price is going up, we say, look, there's inflation. Prices in general are going up. Prices that consumers care about in general are going up. Maybe some of them went down, but by and large they're going up for a consumer to buy the normal stuff that a consumer buys. And now you can imagine all the other price indexes we could have. We have, for example, an important one is the producer price index. And that is all the stuff that a typical producer in Ireland would buy. And so there's maybe more electricity, and there's, instead of an apartment, there's office space, and all the things that a typical producer in Ireland would buy. We put it in a different trolley, secretarial staff, all that stuff in a different trolley, and we find out how much all that costs. And we do that every year. And so you can see as a consumer, you could care less about the stupid producer price index because it's not related to you as a trolley. You don't buy that stuff. You don't hire secretarials for it. You just don't. And so why would you care about that? We have manufacturing price indexes, which have a lot of stuff like retail, like warehouse space, and like electricity becomes super important because there's aluminum and like all the stuff that a typical manufacturer. And there's hundreds of these things for different crowds. But you and I were Irish consumers, and so we buy stuff that a typical Irish consumer would buy, more or less daily. And so that particular trolley of goods is stuff that we are likely to be buying a lot, and so we are going to care about what happens to the consumer price index because it's our trolley, a trolley that matches the kind of things we might buy. All right. Okay. People are tired and we're about done, and I want to go into the detail next time, so I'm going to leave it here. One second. Remember, no class on Tuesday.